Okay. Assalamu alaikum. Good afternoon to you all, and thank you for coming in despite it being a very sunny bank holiday. So it's nice to see you all. Can I just get my Twitter fall fixed? I don't think that's working because I can get that right out. Someone can have a look at that. That'd be great, thank you. Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce the panel to you. So immediately on my right is Anas Al-Takriti. He's a British Iraqi born in Baghdad in 1968, the founder and CEO of the Cordoba Foundation, a political analyst, media commentator, international speaker, and an advisor, and many other things. I'm not going to go through the whole list, there's lots of things here, and the kinds of issues he talks about: Muslim politics, the East and West relations, combating extremism. Dr. Jafar Hadi Hassan is a very distinguished scholar in Jewish studies and specializes in Semitic languages: Arabic, Hebrew, Aramaic, Syriac, and Phoenician. Very impressive. He's also studied German, and he's taught at a variety of universities, including Basra, King Abdulaziz, Manchester, ICAS here in London. He's authored several books on Jewish studies, and obviously he's also Iraqi-born himself. And on my left, Kamran Bukhari. Thank you very much. Kamran Bukhari is a distinguished scholar and expert in Middle Eastern and South Asian affairs. He's presented various research papers at academic conferences and policy forums, been particularly important in shaping Stratfor's knowledge base in the region. And he's the author of a book called Political Islam in the Age of Democratization. Kamran is currently based at the University of Westminster, where he's a visiting lecturer and pursuing his PhD in democracy and Islam. So today's focus is very much about getting questions from you, the audience. I'm going to try and interfere at a very minimal level and allow each of our panelists as much time as possible. We've got just over an hour, so plenty of time to go through the issues. And I believe the way we want to focus this is half the time we want to spend on the issues in the Iraqi election, and the other half we can focus on the personalities and the parties, so that we have enough time to talk about all of the range of issues that will come up in the Iraqi elections. Now, before I turn to the audience for the first question, I just want to ask each of our panelists, just so you have a better idea of where they're coming from. If they had a vote in the Iraqi elections, which way would you vote and why? Just very briefly. Dr. Jafar Hadi Hassan, first of all.
What was the question?
The question is, if you had a vote in the Iraqi elections, who would you vote for and why? Just very briefly.
Assalamu alaikum. There is a party, new party, this election. It wasn't in the last election, 2010, which is the Democratic Civilian Party. If I had to vote, I would vote for that party. The reason for that, I would like to have not a religious government or a government like the one currently governing Iraq. I would like to have a civilian government separating religion and the government. This is why, if I vote, I would vote for the Democratic Civilian Party.
Thank you very much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Can I just make sure, first of all, I see that the sisters sitting here on my right, the brothers on the... There's no enforced segregation, is there? Just to make everything absolutely clear. Good. In response to your question, Fatima, I did vote, actually, and I still have the remnants of the blue indelible ink, which, by the way, turned out to be quite delible, actually. I saw people washing their fingers with thinner and nail polish hours after they had voted. Well, they say that it did, but anyway, that's besides the point. I agree largely with what Dr. Jafar said, that unfortunately religious parties ruling Iraq over the past 12 years have been a disaster. I fear that we would then condemn all religious parties as a result of the absolute disastrous experience of Iraq. I personally voted for Muttahidun. I voted for a friend of mine, someone whom I've known for more than 25 years and whom I trust implicitly. Whether that's going to work or not, that's something that we can discuss, and hopefully we'll have more of a discussion about in the coming few minutes.
reason?
I go to my friend, as I said, use mine. Yep.
Only because he's your friend.
No. There are other reasons. No, there are other reasons, of course. But Muttahidun is seen as the largest political party that consists or represents the Arab Sunnis in Iraq. One of the problems of Iraq, I feel, over the past few years, is the marginalization of Arab Sunnis. I feel that one of the main problems that the Arab Sunnis have suffered is a problem from within, and that is their total political apathy. There have been religious figures as well as political figures who have, over the past few years, who have told Arab Sunnis not to partake in the political process, and as a result, led also and contributed towards the marginalization of the Arab Sunni element of Iraq, which is an intrinsic part, an organic part of Iraq, such as every other part of Iraq. And if they were to marginalize themselves beyond the politics that is being exercised, then that would be bad news for all Iraqis, regardless of their ethnicity, their religion, or their sect.
Thank you very much. Kamran?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. You're going to have to excuse me, I have a very bad throat. This happened yesterday. Okay. Thank you. I don't know if I can answer that question. I'm not Iraqi.
If you did.
B, I don't find anybody worthy of a vote. I just don't see where my vote would actually make a difference. The deck is stacked in such a way that if you vote against Maliki, you're not going to win. If you vote for Maliki, then you're contributing to the problem. So that's where I am.
Okay. Athletic. Okay, let's turn to the audience for the first question then, please. If you could just put your hand up and wait for the microphone to come to you before you ask it, that'd be great. Thank you.
Assalamu alaikum. I wanted to ask, what's the most important concerns of the Iraqi people? What does the SICM believe it for?
Okay, most important concerns for Iraqi people. There are very many of them. Maybe if you could just pick out one or two key concerns. Kamran, why don't you start?
I mean, as much as we'd like to move away from sectarianism, I think that it does offer a useful lens. By no means am I promoting sectarianism. I'm just dealing with reality as it is. There is a lot of intra-communal division, but by and large, there is that ethno-sectarian divide, which is Shia Arab, Sunni Arab, and Kurds, and then the subgroupings. So if you want to start from there, I think that from the point of view, let's start from the north. I think from the point of view of the Kurds, they would like to be able to do two things. One is re-establish a consensus within their own community because of the decline of Jalal Talabani's Patriotic Union of Kurdistan and the disproportionate amount of influence that KRG President Masoud Barzani has gotten. There is that fear that, are things going to remain stable as they have, because, as you all know, the Kurdistan region was seen as the most safest place in Iraq for the last decade since the fall of Saddam. So that's the Kurds. And then, of course, on outside, in their relationship with Baghdad, with the regime there, they'd like to be able to get into a situation where they can get the deal they want on the energy sharing, because there's a huge dispute going on in terms of am I not speaking well? Okay. And so there's a dispute going on where Kurdistan cannot export oil on its own, and Baghdad is basically resisting that. And so the outcome of the election, from a Kurdish point of view, should sort that issue out in their favor. Let's go to the Sunnis. I think for the Sunni point of view, clearly they've been marginalized. Clearly they're very divided amongst themselves. The Syrian crisis has spilled over. You have the militancy now raging on both sides of that border, and especially in Iraq, because Iraq is where Daesh, or the so-called Islamic State of Iraq and Levant, was originally based before they went to Syria. So this is a bad time. Obviously, the Sunnis would want to be able to take care of that, and of course, more share of power for them. I mean, and less marginalization. For the Shia, they have an unusual dilemma in that for the first time they have come to a point where their internal disagreements have become very serious, to the point where we saw Muqtada al-Sadr pulled back from the entire process, said that, I'm giving up politics. He wasn't really doing that, but you get my point, that he's not happy with just aligning with Maliki. Likewise, the Al-Hakim clan has formed a new party. So the Shia community wants to, if you will, shake up the establishment and say that Maliki cannot monopolize power forever. He has to give a chance to others. So I guess that's generally where people's aspirations are at a very high level.
Okay, I'm sure we'll explore some of these issues in a bit more detail in a second. Dr. Jaffer, could you just turn to what you think are the biggest concerns for Iraqis in this election?
Yeah. I think the most important issue is the security issue. I mean, as we know, there are many people are killed every day, even today. For example, there were about 20 or 20 people killed, and more than that number being injured. And the estimate last month, April, there were about 1,000 people killed, 1,000 people killed, and so many hundreds being injured. So I think the first thing, the priority for people in Iraq is the security. That's one thing. And the other thing is the war in Anbar, which is almost becoming a sectarian conflict, a sectarian war. And I am worried that if Maliki comes again and stays in this direction, there might be a real sectarian war, and it maybe this time will take Iraq with it as a state. The other problem also is related to the Kurdish people. I mean, there is acute problem, acute tension between Iraqi central government and the Kurdish autonomous government. Even they said they are going to export oil. I think they've already started to export oil, 100,000 barrels a day, without the agreement of the central Iraqi government. This is a problem. If someone does not sit with these people and talk to them and to agree with them on main things, there will be this problem, of course, will be more complicated. And also the Anbar problem. I think Maliki, unfortunately, was unwise, absolutely unwise. He could have, in the beginning, could have sat with these people and talked to them and gave them most what they, their legitimate demands, and the problem could be solved. Now, probably you've heard in the news that he started now to try to solve the problem. He sent one of the main chief tribes in Anbar, Ali Hatem Suleiman, sent him to Jordan to talk to some chiefs of tribes of Anbar, and he came back, and now some of Daesh moved away from Fallujah. Probably, I don't know whether you've heard of this news. So just to show that he is trying to show, because I'm going to talk about the influence of Iran and United States in the arena, in this complex problem, probably to show to some people that he is trying to solve this problem. So we've got the security problem, we've got the relation with the Kurdish people of Kurdistan, and we've got this Anbar problem, which is, of course, is not only restricted to Anbar, is wider than that. I mean, it is with the Sunnis. Let us speak frankly. I think and I believe that Maliki marginalized the Sunnis in general. And he has not been fair to them. If he comes again, he should change his policy.
Okay, Anas?
Thank you very much. I agree with all the points that were mentioned by both Dr. Jafar and Kamran.
Don't agree too much.
And I know I'll try to mention other issues which might add another dimension. You see, the thing is that concerns me as someone who hails from Iraq, but also as someone who follows the media and also contributes from time to time. What concerns me is that Iraq only comes up in the news when there is violence. Essentially, let's be honest. I mean, we don't talk about I don't know some orchestra in Iraq, for instance, traveling touring the Middle East. We don't speak about Iraq's sporting achievements. We don't talk about. Not that there are many of those, but still, what I mean is that we don't hear about Iraq unless it's bad news. I mean, that's the situation. And unfortunately, the kind of news that we hear and the world is exposed to is political. Essentially, we don't go beyond the politics of Iraq. And I think that the biggest problem of the Iraqi people is actually voicing their own concerns, their own troubles, their own trials, which no one hears about. We hear about the various political factions, we hear about the infighting, we hear about the violence, we hear about elections, we hear about this, about that, but unfortunately, more than 95% of the Iraqi people are living and existing a really miserable kind of existence. They're suffering in existence. I mean, and this, by the way, I mean, many of the things that we could say today could be subjective, simply because in Iraq it's virtually impossible to conduct a proper empirical survey or poll of any kind of legitimate nature. So most of what we're going to be talking about today are more impressions or maybe local estimations. But something that doesn't lie are the figures that we have from renowned international organizations. Amongst them, I'll quote two, Transparency International, for 3 years running, puts Iraq at, amongst the 3 or 4 top most corrupt countries in the entire world. Also, the Mercer Index in 2013 placed Baghdad, of all places, Baghdad. People like Dr. Jafar will tell us for hours and hours about the poetry and the romanticism and the love and the beauty and of Baghdad and the stories and the 1001 Nights, if you will, if you want to go down that particular route. Baghdad, now, according to the Mercer Index, is the worst city, bar none, in the entire world to live in. So those figures, they go beyond the politics, they go beyond the fragmentation that Dr. Jafar and Kamran spoke about. They go down to the very nitty-gritty of everyone's survival. We're not talking, by the way, about a country, just to put things into perspective, we're not talking about a poor country. We're not talking about a deprived country. Last year, Iraq's annual budget approved by Parliament was $129 billion. Per capita, it makes Iraq one of the richest countries in the entire world. Over the past 10 years, since the fall of the former regime, Iraq's combined year-on-year total annual budget comes up to near $900 billion. That's nothing to scoff at. So to find 90 to 95% of Iraqis deprived of the basic amenities like electricity or running water or clean roads or transportation or education or health is a shame, is a disgrace. And this, unfortunately, is pinned down entirely, I would suggest, yes, of course. I mean, I personally, most of you will know that I was one of the leading figures of the anti-war movement, and I blame the occupation for many, many of the failures, but also because there is an essential political failure from within Iraq. And therefore, whilst we may speak, and I think that today we will spend some time speaking about the politics of Iraq, we should also pay a little bit of attention to the daily suffering of Iraqis, whom in many, many areas, and I'm not talking here about any particular denomination of Iraq, I'm talking about throughout Iraq, whom every time they send their children away to school, every time in the morning, they bid them farewell, simply because there is a likelihood, and it's not a minute likelihood, it's a significant likelihood that they won't see them again. To merely express who your name is that may allude to what denomination of Iraq you belong to might cost you your life at a checkpoint, at a haphazard checkpoint that didn't exist there 2 hours ago. You see, that kind of existence is something which which is something which we could talk about, but really, in terms of trying it, it's something that's beyond our wildest imagination.
Okay, there's a few key issues there. Let's just take the security situation first of all. I mean, you've all touched on the fact of the failures of government, but who is responsible for creating this violence? Who are the key characters, and what can be done to tackle them? Dr. Jafar, perhaps you could take that first.
Well, I think mainly is the policy of the government, of the current government. I mean, Noor al-Maliki's government. As I mentioned before, when the people in Anbar started demonstrating, and they stayed in demonstrations for about, I don't know, might be 8 months or 9 months and so on. And to solve this problem from al-Maliki's point of view, he thought to disperse these demonstrations by force. Of course, that is absolutely wrong in politics in Iraq and with the tribes. This cannot be happen like this at all. Of course there will be a reaction. Now, I think if you look back from the time when al-Hashimi was dismissed, vice president, and was accused that his guards were terrorists and so on. He dismissed him and accused him of terrorism. And now he was sentenced to about 3 or 5 death sentences now in absentia. Now that is also wrong. First, he was vice president of the state, which Noor al-Maliki is the prime minister. I mean, it doesn't look good for the country at all. One. Second, the president was Jalal Talabani, the Kurdish person, as you know. And 3, that will have a reaction on the followers of al-Hashimi. Hashimi, as a Sunni, has many followers. And if you look back, you will see the bombing and killing by Daesh and Al-Qaeda and the rest increased since then. And of course increased more when the Anbar people demonstrated for 9 or 8 months. So I think, coming to your question, I think is the failure of the the failure of the al-Maliki's government caused all these problems. I am sure if we have a reasonable prime minister, a wise prime minister, a good politician, a prime minister, he would go to these people, sit with them, discuss their problems, and give to them whatever it is possible and legal. And then the illegal ones or impossible ones may be delayed or have another discussion and so on. I mean, many of these people, as far as I know, from many of these people, not all of them, many, from the former army. And they don't have a salary for the last 10 years. What do? Of course they go to Daesh. Of course they go to Al-Qaeda. So the answer is the failure of al-Maliki's government.
Okay, thank you. A very good point here from a tweet that says, the issue of security at checkpoints with fake machinery could be named as one of the ultimate country cons of the century. So that is a very important issue to raise, those magic wands that don't work. Kamran, beyond, we've talked a lot about the failure of the government already, beyond the failure of the government, who are the key characters responsible for creating the violence and security, and what can be done to try and move on from that?
Okay, I will start by pointing out that while what has happened over the past decade or so is extremely unfortunate. Should not have happened to anybody. But then that's what we want. But what is the reality at the heart of the issue. Whenever you have a regime change, and regime change is not the end of a government, it is the collapse of an entire order, an entire edifice, and this is exactly the kind of conditions you face. Could be anywhere. And, it doesn't have to be Iraq, it could be any part of the world where you have an established order that was removed by force and a new order is trying to come to power. And the new order is being established by those who were the disenfranchised before. Then what you have is what you see in front of you. And therefore, from Maliki's point of view, there is this paranoia that unless he keeps an iron fist, the old days will come back, because you have this idea that the Shia are internally weak and divided, and the Sunnis have historically ruled this place. Now, this may be a wrong assessment. I don't personally completely agree with it, but this is the impulse driving his behavior. That if I don't maintain terror, or the balance of terror, then the other side will. And unfortunately, he has not made wise decisions. But in our line of work, we have to sort of put ourselves in the shoes of the actor and say, okay, how is he looking at the world? What are the pressures, constraints on him to understand why he's behaving the way he's behaving, and more importantly, what to expect next from that individual or from that actor. And so what you have, this is on one side. On the other side, you have a community that has been disenfranchised. And it is fearful, equally fearful, that the new order will be at their expense. And they will have to settle for crumbs given out by the guardians of the new order, and therefore they're not prepared to accept it. But it's not as simple as that, because just as the Shia community is internally divided, the Sunni community is also divided. And I'd like to point out that al-Maliki is not just using force. He has his Sunni allies. He has enough of them, whether it's a token representation or whether it's substantive, we can debate that, but he has enough of them to keep the Sunnis divided. So, and he can play up the card of Daesh, and he doesn't really have to do it, anymore. In the old days, he used to say the Baathists have become jihadists, and people used to wonder, how does that happen? So, but now, after Syria and after what's going on there, this is a weapon in his hand. He can say, look, you want me to be, soft? If I'm soft, this is what's going to happen. Likewise, the other side is saying that this is a tyrant who is about to who wants to build an order in which A, he is powerful, he calls the shots, and his cronies. B, we have no place in it. We have to accept what they give us, and we won't have any share. In these circumstances, it is absolutely normal for the situation that we have right now. So I just wanted to sort of lay that out before we get into sort of discussing how we can sort of move beyond it.
Okay, let's go back to our audience. The gentleman here has got a question.
Assalamu alaikum. Just a quick question in terms of the security process that Doctor was speaking about in terms of Talib Hashmi. You said that Talib Hashmi was the way that Malik dealt with Talib Hashmi could have made the situation worse. I'm not sure that was basically trying to defend Talib Hashmi, or he actually did nothing wrong. And in terms of the panel, there seems to be no one who's basically supporting the government at the moment, and it's likely from the elections that he will have the most votes. So if that is the case, individually, his party will have the most votes. So it would be nice to have someone who's actually going to be talking for the government, and not everyone who's going to be talking against the government. Now, we would say that Malik, he was responsible for most of the terrorist attacks, and that Talib Hashmi, because of the way he dealt with Talib Hashmi, that increased the terrorist attacks. I'm not sure how Nouri Maliki dealing with Talib Hashmi would make it acceptable for terrorist attacks in markets and in the street as a way to retaliate to someone being kicked out of politics. What do general Shias and Sunnis have to do with what someone does in terms of politics. And also in terms of one of the statements that Anas made in January 2014, where he said that Islamic State, the ISIS and Islamic State of Iraq and Sham are a Iranian creation, and that they were the ones that formed the Islamic State of Iraq and Sham, even though that would, to be honest with you, looking at what's actually happening, it would be quite a ridiculous statement to make. But I guess we can all the people can give their opinions on that. If Iran did create the Islamic State of Iraq and Sham, thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. Okay, so there's two different questions there. Dr. Jaffer, could you pick up on the point about Tarek al-Sham? The fact is that his removal from government doesn't justify the terrorist attack. Could you address that point first of all?
I should tell you, I can't hear properly. I had an accident about that.
Sure, yeah.
So raise your voice.
So the point that the gentleman was making is, you said the removal of Tarek al-Sham was badly handled, that led to the terrorist attacks. He says, actually, that doesn't justify the terrorist attacks, and there are other reasons. There are other reasons for the terrorist attacks.
But I said, you see, Al-Maliki always says that he has reports about those who are acting as terrorists or whatever, and he will bring them out whenever he needs to bring them out, right? So I said, when he was vice president, Al-Hashimi, a big position. So he could have, if he had the report about him, he could have brought him and say, listen, I've got this report about you. So it is not fair. We are sharing the government. We are governing the country. So please, could you stop or whatever? I mean, before announcing immediately that the vice president is a terrorist. This is not good for the government, not good for the country, not good for the state, not good for the Sunnis. I said, since that time, the terrorist attack increased. This is what I said. There was terrorist attack. It is not the main reason. Al-Hashimi's removal is not the main reason for the terrorist attack. But I said it was an element, an important element. Particularly, it was followed by accusing the financial minister or finance minister also by terrorism, and he was Sunni, by the way. So, of course, all these accumulation, and they make reaction, of course, among the Sunnis. I mean, why he is not taking Shias, those corrupt people, to put them on trial? Why the Sunni? This is what the Sunnis says, right? So this is what I meant by Al-Maliki's case, and the other
point is for Anas, actually. So, in January 2014, you are quoted as saying, ISIS are an Iranian creation. Could you just address that, because the gentleman says...
Can I just ask where that's quoted? Just...
I'll read that exactly. It's in the article.
Just jog my memory.
Interview by CII Broadcasting with Ibrahim Ganga.
Right. Okay, never mind. I'll try to explain as much as possible. I just wanted to recall the context, but can I just add to the point that was mentioned by Dr. Jaffer Hadi Hassan?
Very quickly, because we do need to move
very quickly. The problem with, I'm not here, I don't defend Tariq al-Hashimi. I believe that Iraq suffers from corruption throughout the state, from the politics to the judiciary to the security services throughout, and therefore I personally don't have much patience with even Iraq's judiciary. So that's my particular position. But regardless of that, terrorist attacks were a highlight and a hallmark of everyday Iraqi life before Tariq al-Hashimi and since Tariq al-Hashimi. So you can't really say that Tariq al-Hashimi's removal or staying had any kind of impact either for or against terrorist attacks. However, I agree entirely. Dr. Jaffer puts it quite well in terms of, if you are in a country that is ruled, unfortunately, by division, that was the way that Iraq was set up. I agree with Kamran that any removal of the regime brings about substantial upheaval, but for upheaval to remain for 12 years is unacceptable. One of the main elements that Iraq suffers from is that it was set up to fail. The way it was set up post-2003 was to fail. There is no way that Iraq, according to the way it was set up in 2003, can actually succeed. Either through its democratic or so-called democratic blocs, the parliament and government and the such, or through its security and military forces, or through its constitution. It simply cannot work however you want it, even with the best of wills. Now, coming to the quote, this wasn't my invention, it wasn't my claim. This was mentioned in an article in the Washington Post in late November 2013. This was the finding of investigators associated with the United Nations who found that Daesh in Syria, they were investigating Daesh in Syria. Daesh in Syria was actually funded in part by Bashar al-Assad, i.e. by proxy through funds coming in from Iran. So I'm not entirely sure, that's why I wanted the quote, the context of the quote.
But can you stand by that comment? You do think that ISIS are
Well,
Iranian creation?
I have no evidence to that apart from a quote from investigators with the United Nations as well as an article in the Washington Post. And to be honest, I think we have sufficient evidence throughout modern history, whether it be Western or Eastern, to find that corrupt, failing regimes, when they want a way out, they create these elements to create sort of an excuse for why they are failing. And yes, the trump card of terrorism is always used whenever a government is failing and wants to unify or to maybe sideline and marginalize a particular element within the country. Al-Maliki's fault, as Dr. Ja'far said, if you have a country like Iraq made up of several denominations, if you want success, you have to make them all feel part and parcel of that process. That's why I voted, not because I feel that the political process is going to work. Actually, I've just said it's not going to work. However, if people fail to believe in that politics will work, they will revert to the ways of Daesh, regardless of whether they believe in them or not, regardless of whether they hate them or not. Because the alternative to political engagement is unfortunately non-political engagement, and that's not just sitting at home and doing nothing. That's actually doing something, and doing something which is not conducive to the best interest of either the country or all its elements.
Okay. Kamran, Anas is saying that ISIS is an Iranian creation, that Iran would have something to gain by this. What do you make of that?
I think there is nuance there. I think that Washington Post report, as is the case with many other reports, like the one that says that the Pakistanis are going to park nuclear weapons in Saudi Arabia, are fantastic. They're fantasy, because the reality is much more messier. What is happening is Daesh, its forces, took control of an area where they could pump oil. And regimes are cynical. Okay? Regimes will play around. So if you have multiple fronts, you have FSA, you have the Saudi-backed militias, the Qatari-backed militias, the Turkish-backed militias, Nusra, Daesh, you have to somehow say, okay, how do I balance all of this? So if you buy oil from them, what was happening is they were buying oil from Daesh. And that was, somehow turned into, well, this is evidence that this was created. I don't think anything is created from scratch. I think that actors exist, they come up, some of them fail, most of them fail, but some of them are then used by, as proxies for certain black and white operations. And so if Bashar al-Assad is doing that, it's because that he needed the oil. Second of all, he wanted to empower Daesh so that he could argue that all of these guys are terrorists. So no FSA, nothing, they're all terrorists and I'm fighting a terrorist war. So that is what has happened, and this is not new. Fundamentally, Iran and a group like Daesh is completely on the other end of the spectrum. So if somehow, as long as the war is going on and there is some use and tactical level in the theater, you will have multiple cases where the Iranian advisors and the Syrian regime and Hezbollah will do these deals and for tactical gains. Strategically, it is not in the interest of Iran to support Daesh because it is a threat to its sphere of influence in Iran.
Okay, so we don't get too distracted by Syria, obviously it does have a factor there, but couple of tweets. Iraq as a democracy is still only a decade old. It will always have teething problems and it needs time. Good point. And a second tweet, which we should actually address, is the lack of support by the panel and other politicians for the Prime Minister Maliki is unreflective of the support by the majority of the country. And it is true that he is most likely to win. So Dr. Jaffer, could you explain why people do support Maliki, despite the fact that you're all raising criticisms of him? Why does he still have popular support?
Well, first of all, we don't know the exact votes. We don't know the exact number. True, they say between 60 or 70 or whatever, whereas supporters of al-Maliki, they say probably 100. So that is one reason. And the other reason that we know he is head of the Dawa party. So there is a party, and he is the Prime Minister. I mean, Prime Minister, of course, he can use the public money. He can use whatever he has in his hand from the finance of the government. He could use his influence, and I think that is the reason why he got more numbers than the others. But it doesn't mean that he's going to be a prime minister. There are a lot of things, a lot of complications in this, more complications than 2010. I don't know if you want us to talk about this.
We'll come to that later on.
We will come to that, okay.
Let's bring in the audience so we can take a few questions and comments. So, gentleman there, and then we'll go to you afterwards.
Assalamu alaikum. I would like to ask Iraqi people here. You talk about people gaining advantage in your country. I'm going to make a statement and a question. Why are you allowing people to gain advantage in your country? You blind to anybody. I tell you the problem with your society. It was from Maliki or before Maliki and after. You got your tribalism in Arab culture. The chieftains of different tribes in the whole of Iraq. Why don't you tackle them? Why don't you make them feel that they are all Iraqi first and then the tribal belonging? Number two, this is my question to you. What are the security forces, foreign security forces, playing part in Iraq at the moment, besides my good Israeli cousins? Who are the other ones and how are they affecting the election? Could you tell me that?
Okay, thank you. Let's take another question as well at the same time.
Yeah, sorry. I'm just going to give a perspective. Before the elections happened, there was a number of weeks where, as the build-up came towards the elections, everyone would bounce ideas of who was voting for who. And generally, the support that would come towards Maliki wasn't necessarily because he was the best candidate, but it was because he wasn't the worst. So it was more a lesser of two evils. So from that thing, when I'm saying that it's kind of unreflective of support, it's not necessarily that the whole country supports him, but it's that he's now had 2 terms in power. He's likely to have a 3rd term now, and if he does, generally the politicians and the panel, I think, are not supporting him. Ayad Alawi has recently come out and said, if he has another term in power, I will ensure this does not occur. So is there potentially an inner revolt that's going to occur? Is there a better candidate for the job? Or is it that Malik will just continue to go on, maybe for a potential 4th term as well?
Okay, so there's several questions there. I'm going to split them up between the panel. Dr. Jaffer, could you address the issue of foreign security forces, outside influences? Who are the outside influences in Iraq and how are they affecting things?
I think the main countries which are going to influence the forming of the government in the future in Iran is Iran and the United States. Iran has a great stake in Iraq, and I think Noor al-Maliki has served the interest of Iran very well. America also would like al-Maliki to have a 3rd term, providing, this is what they say, providing that he could solve the problems of Al-Anbar and the problems with the Kurds. Now, I don't know, you might have heard in the news that two prominent politician supporters went to Iran, Al-Jafari, yes, and Al-Khuzai. Both of them are supporters of Al-Maliki. Now, I think at the moment, Iran has not decided which way to go for one reason, because the results are not out yet. So I think Iran will wait for the result and will work very hard to have Al-Maliki again and to have a third term. Now, if it doesn't succeed, because all the other parties, Sunnis and Shiis, are against Al-Maliki, as you know. All of them. They said, we don't want third term for Al-Maliki. Now, this will be a problem for Iran. But I think at the end, they might agree, particularly Al-Hakim party, might agree to join Al-Maliki, and Al-Maliki could have a third term. Now, Al-Maliki always says he wants a majority government. Now, the majority government, it means that the Shias are governing only by themselves, and the rest are the opposition. Who are the rest? Are the Sunnis. Of course, in this case, the Sunnis don't agree, because they will lose all their benefits. They want to share. And always they say, we want partnership, real partnership. So there are areas when the United States and Iran, they have the same interest. For example, Iran wants a stable country, because that would serve its interest. The United States also wants a stable country. But the United States does not want Iraq to support the regime in Syria, whereas Iran are mistaken that and wants a government to support. That is one of the conditions. So even if Iran agrees to replace Al-Maliki, the person who replaces him should agree to the policy of Iran in Syria, and also to serve its interest in Iran.
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you very much. Okay, a tweet here that says Iran and the US will affect the results of the elections, but what about Qatar and Saudi who finance terrorist groups? Cameron, could you address this point about foreign influences, and perhaps beyond Iran and the US, the point that was made in the tweet there? Who are these other characters that are involved?
Before I do that, I want to make one small point, which is that we lose sight of a very important factor, which is constraints. We assume that America or Iran or anything that's big has a lot of room to maneuver. They don't. Al-Maliki has been useful to Iran, but he's been a headache as well, because the Shiites have been fighting, and it's been a hell of a job for Iran to keep them united. And we've seen that time and again when Muqtada al-Sadr pulls out of the coalition, and then they have to go back, hold hands, and then say, okay, stay there. As far as the other outside powers, I think that for the most part, this is my sense, I don't have any evidence of it, but I'm looking at the behavior of countries like Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Turkey that can actually do something about Iranian influence in the region. Not that they can take care of it, but they're the only ones who have the wherewithal. I think they have come to the conclusion that Iraq is lost. And there's no use focusing on Iraq, because they tried that for a very long time and they could not dislodge the Iranian influence there. That's why Syria is very important. So if you imagine the map stretching from Iran all the way to South Lebanon, to the Mediterranean, you have an Iranian sphere of influence. And the way to weaken Iran for Saudi Arabia and Qatar, more so Saudi Arabia than Qatar, is to punch a hole in that sphere, and that hole is Syria. Now, they've been trying to do that, but unfortunately, the United States and the West has backed away from regime change in Syria because they're fearful of what might happen, the whole chemical weapons thing last August. Worse, The United States is negotiating with Iran on the nuclear deal. There will be a lot of give and take. So yes, there is influence of outside powers like Saudi Arabia and Qatar, but even they are divided. Saudi Arabia and Qatar are fighting over a lot of things, including this whole thing of how to deal with Iran. Turkey was in the beginning on board with this idea that if somehow we can, Turkey has Iran on 3 borders. The actual border, the border with Iraq, and the border with Syria. There's no way for Turkey to project power into the region without dislodging Iran from Syria. So the Turks sided with the Saudis. But now they're looking at this whole thing turning into a big jihadistan. And they don't want that fire on their southern border, so they've pulled back. So yes, there is outside influence, but it's not as if they're very united. Everybody's playing a different game. Saudi Arabia is accusing Qatar of supporting Jabhat al-Nusra, and the Qataris are saying, well, you're supporting your own groups. So it's a mess.
Anas, could you address the issue about tribalism being an ongoing problem and the fact that an Iraqi identity has been formed so that people can overcome tribal division, sectarian division?
Well, we'll need to go back several hundreds of years in order to reboot that particular argument. I feel that one of the failures of the American venture, which brought about the end of the inhumane, beastly Ba'athist regime in 2003, one of the main failures is that basically it played on that particular card to create the new system, which is why I said that the Iraq post-2003 that was set up on the wrong basis. I can sit here and talk for hours, I'm pretty sure most of us can sit here and talk for days about the miseries that Iraq lived under the Ba'athist regime. I myself and my father and the such were victims of the Ba'athist regime. We had to live outside of Iraq since I was a child. But one of the things that I know for a fact, and I'm pretty sure that those like Dr. Jafar, who might have a strong link with Iraq during the 70s and 80s, is the fact that this wasn't, these things, these denominations that we're talking about today, they weren't a highlight of Iraqi society before them. In fact, from a personal experience, in 2004, I sat with my father, and we went through our family tree, and we found, and we are Arab Sunnis from Tikrit, we found that within our families, we have uncles married to Shia ladies, we have aunts married to Shia men, we have cousins and nieces and nephews who don't know whether they're Sunnis or Shias, and to be honest, they don't care and we don't care. And that was, in a sense, that was the nature of Iraqi society by far and large, with obviously some variance from area to area. It was about political descendancy. Those who were dissented politically were targeted, whether they were Sunnis or Shias. Basically, the former regime didn't have a religion. It had a policy of preservation. That's all it had. And in a sense, that's why some Iraqis today, whether they be Kurds, Arabs, Sunnis, Shias, Turkmens, whoever, they sometimes, out of forgetfulness maybe, they yearn for those old days. I refuse that. I reject that, because we don't want to change something bad for something else that's bad. But what I understand is that they yearn for the day when these things didn't matter, when people were blind as to the nature of what sect their neighbors belonged to, that their children choose to marry. They yearn for those days. So on that particular level, I think we had a semblance of that you're talking about, the kind of transcendence of sectarianism, of tribalism, and the such. Unfortunately now, the current state is built on those foundations, and therefore there is no going away, there is no escaping the fact that if any kind of, whether it be al-Maliki, whether it be any other political leader who wants to be prominent in the next phase of Iraqi politics, they have to play the sect card, they have to play the tribal card, they have to play the religious card in order to become prominent. That's unfortunate. And by the way, just in one line, in answering why is it that so many people seem or appear to vote for al-Maliki, because Iraq is ruled by the politics of fear. That's why, and like my brother who said at the back who said, it's basically saying, well, I know that the Maliki is a devil, but I fear that, from the devil I know better than the devil I don't. And the politics of fear are the name of the game today, and that's why we find that al-Maliki is capable of garnering so much popular support.
Okay, thank you. Cameron, very briefly, and then I want to turn to the audience again.
I agree with what Anas just said. I just want to add that the geosectarian landscape of Iraq was not built in 2003. The fact, I agree that there was no religion for the Saddam regime and the regimes before that. But two communities were specifically targeted for different reasons. The Kurds were targeted because they were seen as the other. They're not Arab. The Shia were seen, especially after the rise of the Islamic Republic of Iran, as a fifth column for Tehran. And for that reason, you already had, going into the collapse of the regime, a very divided landscape. I mean, if you look at how the new conservative policy was to do regime change, who did they go to? They essentially went to the Shia and the Kurds and some Sunnis, including people from the Ikhwan, to ally with them against Saddam. And so why were they able to do that? Because those divisions, those fault lines were already very sharp.
Okay, thank you. Couple of questions. So at the back, first of all, let's take yours.
You're not looking at this side of the room, right? There's some hands.
No, I have my eye.
If I may, just to say some general points, and then I go into some specifics, if I may.
Can you keep it very brief, because we've only got about 15 minutes left, and there's a few people in the audience, so very brief, please.
No problem at all. I'll be as brief as I can. First of all, I find this panel extremely laughable, to be quite honest with you. This is not question time. This panel is definitely one-sided. You find that usually when I watch question time BBC, you find different point of views. Every point of view I can see now everyone agrees with, which doesn't really make an interesting panel. So that's my first point. My second point is that there are so many false points mentioned by Dr. Ja'far, by Anas, and by the other gentlemen, mostly by the other two Iraqis, which is very disappointing. I'm going to try to go through some of them. I know you're not going to give me much time, but
just go through the two main ones, because I want to bring other people in the audience.
Sure, but as you can see, it's a very biased
I appreciate that.
You got to give the other side as well.
I appreciate that, and that's been noted, but just two main points,
but
because everyone else...
People have mentioned this point where you keep on skillfully, dodging it. So anyway,
just to be clear, I'm not here to be anti-Maliki. I'm here to ask questions, and I have repeatedly raised that with them.
Sure,
so go ahead.
Sure, but you should give the people the other side some more time. So Anna said 90 or 95% of Iraq is deprived of electricity and water. I don't know what he's talking about. I don't know when is the last time you actually went to Iraq. But now you do find in most regions of Iraq around 100% electricity. If he doesn't believe me, maybe he should go back and live in Iraq. Not sure why he's living here, but you should probably go back to Iraq and live there and enjoy the electricity. I'm not saying there isn't a problem. There is of course a problem in electricity in Iraq, but now it's reaching 100%. So that's not true. He also said Baghdad is worst in corruption, the fourth worst or fifth worst. The figures that were shown actually take into consideration the time of Saddam Hussein as well. So they haven't really. No, let me speak. Yeah, I know
this is transparency.
But let me speak. I know you're dying to say something here, but let me speak, and then you can have your. Of course, you have much more say than I will. Anyway, so these two are the points. So Dr. Ja'far said daily sufferings of Iraqis. And you asked him who is causing all this, and he said Prime Minister Maliki. And honestly, here I'm not here to defend Maliki or any case, but it's interesting that Dr. Ja'far has left everyone else, right? The Daesh who are cutting people's throats, they're making people suffer because of their sect, because they are Shias, etc. And the countries that have actually funded these people to come in and cause these atrocities. And of course you have the problems in Syria. The problem in Syria has caused the security situation to be much worse than in Iraq, and left all these cases. I'm coming to Maliki.
And also, in addition, when he was mentioning regarding Tariq al-Hashimi, and of course Anas also spoke about Tariq al-Hashimi, and he said before Tariq al-Hashimi the security was bad, and after Tariq al-Hashimi security is still bad. It doesn't mean that when you arrest Tariq al-Hashimi security is going to be better. Of course, there are other criminals out there, and his security forces, his security guards came out and said he was involved in these atrocities. Why didn't you mention that? Why didn't you mention that? Well, no, I'm not asking you a question. Let me speak.
Aren't you asking
No, I don't want you to answer now. Answer later, because I know you'll have time. You didn't mention these issues. Regarding...
One more point, and then I need you to end, and you can continue this after the debate, because you've got specific
I'm
questions.
not going to be up there. I need to...
Okay, that's up to you.
But I'm not here to argue after the debate. I'm not here to come out and give my frustration. Someone who's actually a party state of law, Dawlat al-Qanun, who got around now preliminary election results, got around 100 plus votes, 100 plus seats in parliament, is not represented in this panel, and that's a joke.
Okay, as I said, you can take that up with the organisers later on. The gentleman at the front here, please, and then there's a couple of questions on this side.
I agree with brother Anas. I myself have an uncle who's married to a Sunni, and my cousin is married to a Sunni as well. The problem, according to the Independent, not long ago, there was an article. It says 24 out of the 26 suicide bombing in Iraq carried out by foreigners. The problem we have in Iraq is the divisive outsiders, is groups like Boko Haram, who it's a very big subject. For example, we have preachers like Muhammad al-Arifi, who has 9 million followers, and from the year 2006 he goes in mosques and he says Iraqi Shias are boiling Sunni children in big pans, and they're sending them back to their children. The problem, in my opinion, the Saudi generated propaganda from day one. The American went in. They gave that image that the Sunnis are oppressed in Iraq. And a lot of people from Tunisia, from Libya, they came to Iraq. And Al-Qaeda played a major role in destabilizing Iraq. The point I want to mention, yes, it's not a perfect situation, but the problem with Maliki, in my opinion, is it's that bringing other people into the government. So he gave the electricity ministry to Ali Alawi bloc. The Sadris have, it becomes a consensus government, and you have to keep everyone happy. And it's the Ali Alawi bloc who control the electricity ministry and couldn't do something about it for the last 10 years. And at the same time, they criticized Maliki for that.
Sorry, I'm going to have to ask for your question. Have you got a question?
I don't have any questions.
Okay, that's fine.
And so one point, just about, when I went to Iraq, I didn't have an Iraqi passport, and it was a Sunni gentleman who helped a Shia to get a passport. And the wages in Iraq, my dad's a doctor, and he's got friends who are lecturers in medicine in Mosul University, and they would tell you for a fact their wages went from $30 a month at Saddam's time to $3,000. My uncle is the same. He couldn't afford to buy 30x at the time of Saddam. Now they are getting $1,800 a month. So a lot of the money is, and we're getting a budget of $1 billion because Iraqi oil production went from 200,000 in Saddam's time to almost 3 million barrels a day. So that's achievements for the Iraqi Maliki.
Okay, so it's a very good point there. There were a couple of points here, and then I'm going to have to ask for kind of concluding comments.
Salam alaikum. I just want to say, make a point about the election impact. I just seen a tweet saying that Maliki may have got 72 seats. So it's a question for the panel. I know a lot of these early announced results have actually been unreliable in the past, so we don't know. If it is the case that he's got only 72 seats, there's a lot of opposition across ethno-confessional divides in Iraq to him staying on, possibly even within his own party. Now, of course, this horse trading, as they call it,
is probably going to go on for months, if not a year. I've been following some of the public statements of Ammar al-Hakim, and it strikes me as a possibility that if Maliki has in the region of 72 seats, he could be in real trouble, and he could face a coalition of coalitions to try and unseat him. And that there is a possibility that has been raised by a number of analysts. It's not a widespread theory, it's a possibility that there could be, the ISCI, for example, and one of the Kurdish parties, because they have links, ISCI and the Sadr's Arab bloc, which they've been united in the April elections. Sorry, I'll be very quick. And the possibility that also Mujahideen might also ally with ISCI. And a lot of people might be surprised by that idea. I don't see it as completely impossible. Again, that's actually based on what Ammar al-Hakim has said. Now, even with Mujahideen, some of their, the governor of Mosul, Athil al-Najafi, he's actually been closer than some people, were surprised by to the Kurds recently. In fact, there was collaboration on oil refinery, and then if you look at the autonomy agenda that ISCI had for Basra, and also, of course, the Kurdish agenda, and in fact, even Athil al-Najafi and Nina were wanting more control for the province. Do you see that possibility of such a coalition?
Okay, possibility of unlikely alliances. And there was one last question from here. Yeah.
I just wanted to ask a question. Soon after the regime change in Iraq, about 2 years very soon after the elections, at a talk, somebody said exactly what you said, is the current system that is in place is deemed to fail. So, 7-8 years down the line, if the regime is set up to fail, what is the solution? I mean, nobody's given an opinion as to what is the solution. I mean, if it's deemed to fail, what's the point of having elections? And I know 7 years ago, this gentleman said it, that it is set up to fail. So that's my question to you.
Okay, a very good question. So I'm going to ask each of the panelists very briefly in 2 minutes just to talk about solutions and future. So Dr. Jaffer, could you begin? Solutions to some of the problems we've raised and what will happen in the future.
If you don't mind, I'll answer briefly to the gentleman.
Okay, yeah.
Just very briefly.
Okay, very brief.
First, I didn't say that terrorism started with Hashemi at all. I said the removal of Hashemi contributed to the increase of terrorism. Second, I said the failure of the policy of al-Maliki caused this terrorism, Daesh and the rest. And the evidence for that, now he is trying to negotiate with them. He sent Hatem Suleiman or Ali Hatem Suleiman to Jordan, and he came back, and now the situation, they say, is a little better. So that is the answer for that. The solution for the government?
The solution for many of the problems that we've raised, the sectarianism, the security, can you just give us what you think is a possible solution?
Well, I think you need a wise policy and a wise prime minister. And I am saying now to the gentleman also, I don't hate Noor al-Maliki. I think if Noor al-Maliki would like to form a government, he should be given a chance first, because he got more votes than the rest. Then if he fails, of course, they would go to the other parties. Simply, I don't think now of any solutions. I say we need a wise prime minister to treat all the people the same, because all of them, they are citizens of Iraq.
And that's the same question.
You don't...
And perhaps you could also address the unlikely alliances.
Yeah. We don't have to hate people when we're against them. I am politically against someone. I don't mean that I hate them. I don't know them to hate them. But I know for a fact that Iraq today is at the bottom of the performance of every single level that you can imagine. And that tells me that the other day I heard the news that the Korean Prime Minister offered to resign, I think actually resigned, because of the ferry disaster in South Korea. It wasn't him, he wasn't there, he didn't play a role. I'm pretty sure that he wasn't on board, he didn't escape and jump ship, yet he offered to resign because people in charge, people when they stand to be elected as officials and they win and they form governments, they hold responsibility. In fact, it was al-Maliki himself who came out on TV a few months ago and said, I'm the executive who's responsible for Iraq, and I am in charge of Iraq, so I'm holding him responsible. So it's not a matter of hate or love, it's a matter of that he has failed. Coming to the unlikely, and by the way, my figures, at the very start I said, Iraq doesn't allow for any proper or legitimate poll or survey. And hence the only surveys I will use are internationally accredited surveys, including Transparency International. If you have an issue with them, raise it with them, their offices in Berlin. And the Mercer Index here in London. If you wish, raise it with them. And regarding the 95% electricity, the International Energy Organization issued that particular report in November of last year. You have an issue, raise it with them. I'm just, conveying those particular figures. Unlikely alliances are extremely likely. I know for a fact that Najafi, Ammar al-Hakim, and Barazan have been talking for a number of months. They've been talking about, there was even a talk about them entering the elections as in one shape or another. That was far-fetched, but I think that coming together after the elections is extremely likely. The issue we have to understand in terms of the vote, and Dr. Jafar is a brilliant Democrat, but I fear that the values that he upholds don't work in Iraq, because it doesn't really matter much how many votes or how many seats al-Maliki or anyone else wins in Iraq. It's about what happens behind closed doors and secret negotiations. Because let's not forget, in 2010, al-Maliki didn't win. Alawi won. But where is Alawi now? So in a sense, those are by the bys. That doesn't really matter. What's gonna really matter is the heads coming together behind closed doors with external influences, whether it be from Washington, whether it be from Tehran, whether it be from anywhere else, Istanbul, maybe, I don't think so, that will bang heads together and create new alliances. I think it's extremely possible, unless, by the way, if Iran intervenes in the very last hour or the last minute and commands or issues some directive to all the major Shi'i blocs to come together like it did in 2010, that will be a foregone conclusion. Khalas, we'll have a return. It'll just be who is it going to be? Is it going to be al-Maliki? Is it going to be Baqir Solar? Is it going to be someone else? That's the only question. But apart from that, it's going to be a foregone conclusion. Just one final thing. We didn't have the time, because of the time constraint, to talk about the external influences. Dr. Jafar spoke about Iran. I spoke about Iran. But when we talk about Saudi Arabia, to me, it's an equally negative influence on Iraq as Iran. I think that all the countries around Iraq have played an extremely there isn't a country around Iraq that has played a positive role inside Iraq. Unfortunately, Saudi Arabia is a failed political entity anyway, and that's it for another day. But the role that it's played has been equally detrimental to the role that I find Iran has played over the past 12 years.
Okay.
Just 1 second.
We don't really have
just
time.
Once.
Okay, very quick, very, very quick.
Just to Anas, according to the Iraqi institution, anyone who has more votes, the president should ask him to form a government. If he fails, within 30 days, he will go to the other party.
Thank you. Kamran, solutions, future, and particularly addressing the point that is the system just doomed to fail?
Well, I mean, we have to define failure. Things don't fail, things don't succeed in years. We need to look at, a much longer time horizon. I mean, this state is still grappling with itself. It's 10, 11 years old. But I think that ultimately, it's in the interest of all stakeholders to come together, because if they can't come together, and notice, by the way, how they don't really cross the line. You know, ultimately they make threats, they do these things, but they know that if they pull out of this fabric, the post-Ba'athist state, this system that has a lot of problems, but if they pull out, then they have nothing. So I'm optimistic that at some point things will balance, but it's going to be a while, and a lot of unfortunate blood is going to be shed, and that's human history for you. As to your question about alternative alliances, it's possible, but the only way it's possible if Ammar al-Hakim is sure that Shia domination of the state will not suffer because of an alliance with the others. If he believes that that is the case, he may go for it. If the Iranians believe that that will be the case, they may go for it. But given the geosectarian polarization in the region, I seriously doubt that we're going to see anything but a new coupling of Shia groups, as Anas said, and they will have their token Sunnis, and they will do a deal because, look, Talabani is up to be replaced. So Barzani needs the presidency, and he will give and take behind closed doors.
Okay, there is a lot more to be discussed, and I hope you can do it over refreshments. Before we end, a couple of tweets I want to point out. There's one that says there are absurd statistics, unreliable facts in this panel, so I'm sure there's things that you want to take up with each of the speakers, and I hope that you do that over tea. And one very good tweet that points out the role of Britain in Iraq and flags up that the publication of the Iraq inquiry, the Chilcot inquiry, which we're still waiting for, may help discuss some of the issues around the actual war in Iraq. So a very good point there. But apart from that, thank you very much to the audience and your passionate responses. Thank you very much to all of the panelists, and I look forward to seeing you again, maybe a debate on Iran or Saudi Arabia next time. Thank you.